Single mom fired after saving a CEO's father, until the millionaire's son stepped in. The ambulance doors slammed shut just as the elderly man opened his eyes. His weak fingers were wrapped tightly around the sleeve of a terrified woman standing beside him. "Don't let them fire her," he whispered. The paramedics exchanged confused looks. The woman didn't understand what he meant. She was exhausted, covered in dust, and still shaking from what had just happened. Only minutes earlier, she had been working behind a cash register at one of the city's most expensive department stores. Then, an elderly stranger collapsed outside the entrance. While dozens of wealthy shoppers stood frozen, filming the scene with their phones, she had run toward him without hesitation. She didn't care about her uniform. She didn't care about company rules. She only cared about keeping a dying man alive. And she succeeded. What she didn't know was that the man she had just saved was the father of one of the most powerful CEOs in the city. But before the ambulance disappeared around the corner, her manager called her back inside. Instead of thanking her, he handed her a termination letter. "You abandoned your station," he said coldly. She stared at him in disbelief. "I saved someone's life. That isn't our concern." Her job was gone. Her only source of income was gone. And her 6-year-old son was waiting for her at home. She thought that was the end of the story. She was wrong. Because 3 days later, the son of the man she had saved walked into the same department store. And when he discovered what they had done to the woman who saved his father's life, he made one phone call that changed everything. The woman who couldn't walk away. At 6:15 every morning, Nadia Brooks woke before her alarm. She never needed it anymore. Life had trained her to wake early. At 20 years old, Nadia had already learned that there was no room for laziness when someone depended entirely on you. She quietly climbed out of bed, careful not to wake her 6-year-old son, Micah. The little boy was curled beneath a thin blanket, one arm wrapped around an old stuffed rabbit. Nadia smiled. Then she walked into the tiny kitchen of their apartment. The refrigerator contained half a carton of milk, 2 eggs, and a few vegetables. She opened her purse. $37. That was everything she had until payday. She sighed. "Enough for groceries," she whispered. She would figure out the rest later. Nadia had become very good at saying that. She would figure out later. She would pay the bill later. She would sleep later. She would worry later. For now, Micah needed breakfast. His father had left when he was 2. There had been promises at first. Phone calls. Excuses. Then silence. Eventually Nadia stopped waiting. She found work at the upscale Belmont department store, where she worked as a cashier. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent. It kept food on their table. And most importantly, it allowed her to be home with Micah most evenings. Nadia knew the store's management expected perfection. Employees were expected to smile constantly. They were never supposed to leave their assigned stations. They were warned repeatedly that customers should never see employees arguing, complaining, or looking tired. Nadia followed every rule. She arrived early. She stayed late. She rarely took her full lunch break. If an elderly customer struggled with shopping bags, Nadia helped. If a confused shopper couldn't find an item, Nadia walked them there herself. She never expected praise. She simply believed that kindness cost nothing. That belief would soon cost her everything. That morning, Belmont was unusually busy. A major investor was reportedly visiting the downtown district, and management wanted the store looking perfect. Managers rushed around inspecting shelves. Security guards stood near every entrance. Employees were warned to remain alert. Nadia stood behind Register 7, greeting customers with her usual smile. Around noon, she noticed something strange outside. An elderly man in an expensive gray suit was walking toward the fountain. He stopped. His hand went to his chest. Then his knees buckled. He crashed onto the pavement. A woman screamed. Someone shouted for security. Several people immediately pulled out their phones. Nadia didn't think. She left her register and ran. "Sir." She dropped beside him. The man was breathing, but barely. His skin had turned pale. Nadia quickly checked for a pulse. Weak. Very weak. "Someone call an ambulance." A security guard hesitated. "I already called." "Good. Tell them he's having trouble breathing." Nadia removed her jacket and placed it beneath the man's head. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes opened slightly. He tried to speak. Nadia leaned closer. "Don't talk. Just breathe." Around them, people watched. Some whispered. Others recorded. One man even complained that Nadia was blocking the entrance. She ignored him. She kept talking to the elderly stranger. "My name is Nadia. You're going to be okay." The man weakly reached for her hand. His fingers trembled. Nadia held them. "Stay with me." Minutes passed. Then the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed forward. They examined the man and immediately began treatment. One of them looked at Nadia. "How long has he been unconscious?" "Only a few minutes." "You did the right thing." Nadia exhaled in relief. As they lifted the elderly man onto the stretcher, his eyes opened again. He looked directly at Nadia. His fingers grabbed the sleeve of her uniform. "Please." His voice was barely audible. Nadia leaned closer. "What is it?" But he had already lost consciousness. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Nadia stood watching as it disappeared. She smiled through tears. At least he was alive. She turned around and walked back inside. She expected a thank you. Instead, her manager was waiting. His name was Victor Crane. His expression was furious. "Where have you been?" Nadia stared at him. Someone collapsed outside. "I know. I couldn't just leave him. You abandoned your register." Mr. Crane, he was dying. And customers were waiting. Nadia couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I saved his life." Victor opened a folder. "Company policy is clear. Employees cannot leave their stations without authorization." "I didn't have time to ask for permission." Victor pulled out a document. Nadia's stomach dropped. "What is that?" "Your termination notice." She stared at the paper. "No. Your employment ends today. Please." Victor pushed the paper toward her. "Sign it." Nadia's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't do this. I have a child." Victor shrugged. "You should have thought about that before abandoning your station." Something inside Nadia broke. She slowly signed. Then she walked to the employee room and packed her belongings. A photograph of Micah. A coffee mug he had painted for her. A small keychain. That was all she had. When she walked out of Belmont carrying the cardboard box, no one stopped her. No one apologized. No one asked if the elderly man had survived. Nadia reached the bus stop and finally allowed herself to cry. She looked at the termination letter. Then at the photograph of her son. "What am I going to tell you, Micah?" She didn't know that across the city, the elderly man she had saved had just opened his eyes in a private hospital room. And the first question he asked was simple. "Where is the woman who saved me?" His doctor looked confused. "Which woman?" The elderly man closed his eyes. "The woman in the blue uniform." His name was Harold Whitmore. And he wasn't just another wealthy businessman. He was the father of Adrian Whitmore, the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Industries. When Adrian received the call that evening, he immediately drove to the hospital. He found his father sitting upright. "How are you feeling?" Harold looked at him. "Alive." Adrian smiled with relief. Then his father's expression became serious. "Find her." "Find who?" "The woman who saved my life." Adrian frowned. "What woman?" Harold looked toward the window. "Her name is Nadia." He paused. "And before you do anything else?" "Yes. Find out what happened to her after I left." Adrian had no idea that the answer would make him furious. Because by the following morning, he would discover that the woman who had saved his father's life had been fired for doing it. Millionaire's Nadia was sitting at her kitchen table trying to make a plan. Whitmore sat her rent in his father's in 4 days. Room, with a tablet in his hands. 11 job applications. He had spent most of his adult life already solving rejected problems. Her. Business had not responded. Financial problems. She was staring at her bank balance when Michael walked into the room. He wasn't looking at numbers. She quickly closed the banking app. He was looking at the face of a woman sweetheart he had never met. Are you going back to work today? Brooks, Nadia 28 years old. No. Single mother. She smiled at Belmont Department Store. Job. No criminal record for a moment. No disciplinary history. Say sorry. 3 years of employment. Eyes became wet. Excellent customer reviews. Then they're mean. Adrian scrolled further. Softly. Then he stopped. Maybe a little. She was fired. Micah climbed onto her lap. Looked at him. That's what I told you to find out. Yes. She was fired the same day. You're a hero. She saved you. Nadia hugged him. She wished the world worked toward his father. She wished she left her register. Guaranteed Harold stared things would happen. For me, life apparently had taught her otherwise. The elderly man's expression came at the door. She could have let Nadia look confused. Adrian nodded. Nobody ever visited. She Harold looked away. A tall man in a dark made a very expensive in the hallway. I'm looking for Nadia Brooks. Should I have our attorney's contact? My name is Adrian Whitmore. Shook his head. Nadia's expression changed. Not yet. She recognized Harold the name looked at him immediately. I want to meet Everyone her first. Did. Adrian Whitmore was the 35-year-old CEO of Whitmore Industries. He had appeared in business magazines, television interviews, and newspapers. But why was he standing outside her apartment? Adrian spoke calmly. My father asked me to come. Nadia's heart skipped. How is he? Alive. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank goodness. Adrian studied her for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. Thank you. Nadia shook her head. You don't have to thank me. I do. He glanced at the small apartment behind her, then back at her. You saved my father's life. Nadia looked down. I just couldn't walk away. Adrian smiled slightly. That's exactly why I'm here. He handed her an envelope. Nadia hesitated. What is this? An invitation. To what? Dinner. She looked confused. With your father? Yes. Nadia shook her head. I don't think that's necessary. It is to him. She looked at the envelope again. Why? Adrian's expression became serious. Because he wants to thank you personally. That evening, Nadia arrived at the Whitmore estate. She had never seen a house like it. The driveway alone was larger than the street where she lived. The garden stretched for what seemed like miles. But when Harold came into the room, Nadia forgot about the mansion. She saw the elderly man from the fountain. He looked healthier now. He smiled. Nadia. She smiled back. Mr. Whitmore. He walked toward her slowly. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He took her hands. I owe you my life. Nadia shook her head. Please don't say that. It's true. I only helped. Exactly. Harold looked into her eyes. Do you know how many people walked past me that day? Nadia remained silent. 43. She looked surprised. My security team reviewed the footage. Harold's voice trembled. 43 people saw me collapse. He paused. Only one stopped. Nadia didn't know what to say. Harold continued. I want to repay you. Nadia immediately shook her head. No. Adrian looked surprised. No. I don't want money. Harold smiled. I didn't offer money. Nadia looked at him. What are you offering? Harold turned toward Adrian. His son stepped forward. I've learned what happened after you saved my father. Nadia's expression changed. You mean my job? Yes. I'm already looking for another one. You shouldn't have to. Nadia frowned. What does that mean? Adrian placed a folder on the table. Belmont has a major supply contract with Whitmore Industries. Nadia stared at him. Adrian continued. We spend millions with them every year. She slowly understood. You're going to cancel the contract? No. Nadia relaxed. Then what? I'm giving Belmont one opportunity. For what? To correct what they did. The next morning, Victor Crane was summoned to Belmont's executive office. He walked into the room, expecting a routine meeting. Instead, the store's regional director was waiting. His face was pale. Victor, sit down. Victor obeyed. What happened? The director slid a letter across the desk. Whitmore Industries is reviewing its relationship with us. Victor's heart stopped. Why? The director stared at him. Because of Nadia Brooks. Victor's face changed. The cashier? The woman you fired? Victor swallowed. What does she have to do with Whitmore Industries? The director leaned forward. Do you know who collapsed outside our store? Victor remained silent. Harold Whitmore. Victor's mouth opened. The CEO's father? Yes. Silence filled the room. The director pointed toward the termination paperwork. You fired the woman who saved him. Victor suddenly understood. His mistake wasn't just cruel. It was enormous. By noon, the story had spread throughout Belmont. Employees whispered. Managers panicked. Customers began asking questions. And then Adrian Whitmore walked through the front entrance. Every conversation stopped. He walked directly toward the manager's office. Victor stood as Adrian entered. Mr. Whitmore. Adrian looked at him. Do you remember Nadia Brooks? Victor swallowed. Yes. Good. Adrian placed a document on the desk. Because I want you to read this. Victor picked up. His hands began shaking. It was a formal complaint regarding Nadia's termination. But beneath it was something else. A new offer. Adrian had arranged for Nadia to receive a senior customer relations position at Whitmore Industries. A salary more than double what she had earned at Belmont. Full benefits, child care assistance, and an education fund for Micah. Victor stared at the document. You hired her. Adrian nodded. She earned it. Victor looked down. But why? Adrian's answer was simple. Because compassion should never be punished. 3 days later, Nadia stood in the lobby of Whitmore Industries wearing a new suit. Micah stood beside her. He looked up at the enormous building. Mommy, do you work here now? Nadia smiled. I do. Are you going to save people again? She laughed. I hope so. Harold approached them with a cane. He smiled at Micah. Your mother saved my life. Micah looked proudly at Nadia. I told you she was a hero. Everyone laughed. Nadia looked around. Just days earlier, she had been standing at a bus stop with a cardboard box in her arms, wondering how she would feed her son. Now she had a new job, a new opportunity, and a future she had never imagined. But the greatest reward wasn't the salary. It wasn't the mansion. It wasn't even the position. It was knowing that the kindness she had shown when nobody was watching had finally come back to her. Harold reached for her hand. Never regret walking away from that register. Nadia smiled. I don't. Adrian nodded. Neither do I. Nadia looked at Micah. Then she understood something. Sometimes life takes something away from you only to make room for something better. Sometimes the door that closes is the reason another door finally opens. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change an entire life. Nadia had simply stopped to help a stranger. She had expected nothing. But that one decision changed the future of a single mother, her son, an elderly billionaire, and an entire company. Because kindness doesn't always return immediately. Sometimes it takes days. Sometimes it takes years, but when it returns, it can come back bigger than you ever imagined. And the people who once believed compassion was a weakness may eventually discover that it was the very thing that changed everything. The millionaire's son steps in. The next morning, Adrian Whitmore sat in his father's hospital room with a tablet in his hands. He had spent most of his adult life solving problems, business problems, financial problems, legal problems. But this one felt different. He wasn't looking at numbers. He was looking at the face of a woman he had never met. Nadia Brooks, 28 years old, single mother, cashier at Belmont Department Store. No criminal record. No disciplinary history. 3 years of employment. Excellent customer reviews. Adrian scrolled further. Then he stopped. She was fired. Harold looked at him. That's what I told you to find out. She was fired the same day she saved you. Why? Adrian turned the tablet toward his father. She left her register. Harold stared at the screen. For me, apparently. The elderly man's expression hardened. She could have let me die. Adrian nodded. But she didn't. Harold looked away. Then Belmont made a very expensive mistake. Adrian picked up his phone. Should I have our attorneys contact them? His father shook his head. No. Why? Not yet. Harold looked at him. I want to meet her first.